It's been documented in studies, and you may have read this too, that if you have an optimal level of vitamin D, you minimize the chance of hospitalization by 80%.
So joining me today is Antony Haynes, one of the most senior nutritionists in the country. And Antony has been in private practice for over 29 years. He's one of the most experienced registered nutritional therapists in the UK. He's one of the first practitioners to implement the principles of functional medicine. He's been teaching graduates for over 25 years now. He's won a number of awards. He's an award-winning nutritionist. He's written 2 books. He's a successful award-winning author. And the 2 books on nutrition are the Insulin Factor and the Food Intolerance Bible. Welcome to the chat, Antony.
Thank you, Anshu. Thank you for the intro. Very much indeed. A pleasure to be here.
What is it that a nutritionist actually does?
A nutritionist is designed through their practice and training to identify what imbalances an individual has, to correct them in order to achieve the health goals of the client. And I would say certainly that's what I've aimed to do. So things have evolved over time, as you can imagine, with 18,500 clients. And it's thousands, and that's about 30,000 appointments that I've had. My aim is to identify this myself, and it's really an extension of the overview of what a nutritionist does. Identify the smallest number of changes in your nutritional intake and lifestyle that can help to bring about the things that you desire most, so your health goals. So that's what I do. And it's actually more sophisticated, and I'm aiming to be as sophisticated as I can to identify the smallest number of things versus the greatest number of things to do. So I'll give you an example of that. When I was younger and less experienced, I would sometimes throw the Encyclopedia Britannica of nutrition at clients. And it would become in the form of handwritten papers, because I began before computers were really here, and then longer reports about lots and lots of things to do. So first of all, you need to read lots of information. Then you need an assistant at home, possibly a chef, possibly to get all the food you need, etc. You need an alternative income as well in order to implement. So it needs to be practical, doable, but also it needs to be targeted. So I found that targeted intervention, identifying exactly what people need to do with the smallest number of changes to bring about the biggest outcome, is what I would hope all nutritionists would aim for. But of course, you do need clinical experience. You do need technical knowledge to achieve just that.
There's a term which has become really fashionable, and you were one of the first in the UK to do that, which is functional medicine.
Yes.
Can you explain to us exactly what that is?
Pathology medicine is what modern medicine is. Modern medicine looks at doing tests and rushing as quickly as possible to a diagnosis of a pathology, which is a construct about having a cholesterol level above a certain level, or having a certain analyte, etc. Nothing to do with signs or symptoms particularly, but signs and symptoms then lead the doctor to say, well, do this test. Yes, we've got RA factor, rheumatoid arthritis factor, you've got rheumatoid arthritis. So rush the diagnosis in order to implement the protocol of medical intervention to palliate the pathology. Functional medicine actually very much works with the client as a partnership, with the client in the center, rather than being a recipient of information with no actual interaction. So the practitioner-patient is a partnership where we look to identify long case history, underlying causes, and correct the underlying causes that are leading to the signs and symptoms manifesting. And so it's really addressing the underlying causes. So in this way, it's actually identical to what naturopaths and indeed holistic nutritionists have been taught ultimately. But the Institute of Functional Medicine in particular, has coined the term functional medicine, and they've given this description of it. So really you're looking at the antecedents, the triggers, and the mediators. The things that cause it, the things that trigger it, the things that may contribute to it. Antecedents, mediators, and triggers. Look at the underlying causes and correcting them, empowering the individual to make changes for themselves, because they intellectually understand that if I do this, this is going to happen, and I'm going to improve my health, as opposed to take that pill, have that operation,
and then sort it
do
out.
this, and sort it out. It's really a modern day term for an ancient process of appreciation of where someone's health was at. I understand from the Chinese perspective, whether this is true or not, I don't know, but you understand you paid your doctor when you were well, and you didn't when you were unwell. Notion of supporting health rather than just seeing them when you're ill. So it's really addressing underlying causes. Causes. And we get taught as nutritional therapists, and I'm studying this still, and I teach it, sort of the underlying biochemical mechanisms that underpin imbalances, so we can identify, correct that. And many individuals engage in relatively expensive testing, but the more experience you have, the less tests typically are needed, because signs and symptoms tell us what's going on inside the body.
Right. Why is it that nutrition is so important?
Yeah, it's important for everything. What's fascinating is that nutrition, it's estimated that the food that we eat, this is by official, I'm not sure it's the general medical practice, but it's certainly the United Nations World Health Organization, so those groups in terms of global health, it's estimated that the food we eat in our lifetime is the single biggest factor that contributes to our well-being or not. So morbidity. So there's the number one. It's up there and out there. What's interesting is that in the mainstream medicine, of course, you may well understand this, that the numbers of hours of training is extremely limited, and maybe 3 hours, that maybe it was taught the wrong thing. And certainly most doctors I've been involved in teaching, lovely GPs that I've met, have forgotten or didn't really understand what that was about, and they have no relevance, and they have no fluency of understanding of nutritional biochemistry at all. They have no teaching in it, so why would they know? Right. They're there as gatekeepers for pathology, diagnosis, and then protocol treatment. That's what they're there for. So the nutrition, every single cell in your body is made from a nutrient. So that's just to state the obvious, but if you didn't know that, every single cell, and the food that we eat basically has an effect on our gene expression to one degree or another. So genes are affected by the epigenetics, the exposure of our thoughts, of our lifestyle, of exercise, of sleep, toxins and so on, but also nutrition. Nutrition has a prime role to play on the genetic expression, so it has an epigenetic effect, effectively. And we require nutrients for multiple different purposes. So nutrients are what's actually referred to as complicated words, pleiotropic. One nutrient can have 350 effects in the body.
Wow.
And they work in synergy. They work in synergy. So 1 + 1 could equal 10 in terms of the effect. And so we've got 50 essential nutrients, and I would put this to anyone, and I do to my students and the graduates of nutritionists, saying, well, do you know what the 50 essential nutrients are? Do you know where they are in food? Do you know how much you need? And can you tell if someone's lacking them from a case history assessment and or testing of some kind? Because optimizing nutritional status can have a tremendous impact on every aspect of health. And it's actually often an imbalance in those things. So you can have an excess of some, but generally it's a lack of nourishment. And we know from all the studies conducted in the Western world and in England that it's extremely rare, in fact, almost impossible for any individual eating any organic diet to consume a level of nutrients that is going to support an individual's health in a powerful way. Preventative, yes. So I will actually come on to this. So the RDA is the recommended daily allowance of nutrients.
Okay.
And that is likened to the current account, if I liken it to a banking system. So we've got current account. So the RDA keeps us in spending today. What happens if you have an extracurricular expense, like, etc.? So, well, that means you need to dig into your savings account. So that's a higher level of nourishment. So we've got the RDA, which is basically to keep a very well person well for that one day. There are very few people who have that state of being. And then you need a higher level of nourishment for many, many nutrients, and that's a savings account. But if you wanted to protect yourself from DNA damage and the expression of a chronic degenerative disease, and that's called NCD, non-communicable diseases, which are actually about 70 to 80% of the cost of the NHS, then you actually need a pension account. So which is actually an even higher level. So current account, that's not going to serve you very well. Any extra expense, you're going to be in overdraft and you're going to suffer. So you need a savings account that's going to protect your organ reserve. And to protect DNA from aging process, you need a pension account. So the levels of nutrients ascend accordingly. Now I think it's a pretty easy grip. So if you have vitamin C, for example, if you just have 100 milligrams a day, that might just be the current account. But really, you need more like 1,000 milligrams a day for a savings account. And if you wanted to have further protection, maybe take 1,000 or 1,500 milligrams in divided doses over the day. And the same applies to all nutrients. And the level, the level for each nutrient varies. So the nutrition is vital for every single cell. All cells have an impact, are impacted by nutritional status. So in that sense, I've had the blessing of seeing remarkable changes in a remarkably wide array of different conditions in my career.
So tell me, what tests do you recommend people go and do every year?
Vitamin D testing is available on the NHS, and so therefore I would say vitamin D, but of course it's one of 50 nutrients, but it is a very important one. And it may be a reflection of overall nutritional status too. So I think vitamin D, which you can get technically for free at the point of service anyway via the doctor, but there are also tests you can pay for which are relatively inexpensive. I think a mineral screen for those involved in nutrition. And I've had so many clients who have an imbalance in minerals, even if they're eating a very good diet on paper, as they may have various imbalances. So a mineral test, which is typically organized privately, Now, otherwise, we've got the standard what's called hematology and biochemistry, so, or complete blood count. And those are, again, conducted by doctors. And there's lots of markers within that can give an indication of nutritional status. However, the doctor is unlikely to be able to highlight those for you because they don't have the training in understanding why the biochemistry is linked to nutrition. So it is true to say that I think the finger prick test from on the vitamin D is probably a really great one, particularly after winter, because our vitamin D levels goes down every month from about now because the UVB light is not present. So probably vitamin D is a great one. Mineral testing, I think that there are literally 50,000 tests you could do. I mean, literally 50,000 tests. I did a review of what tests I'd use myself with my clients. I don't recommend many tests. I recommend less tests now than I ever had done before, from stool tests to organic acid testing and hair tests even, but I don't recommend those really. And I discovered that there were 24 different lab tests I used in 1 year. With my clients. So it's a very good question, but a difficult one to actually nail down. But I would say if we had the opportunity, I would check your vitamin D. But of course, we can't check vitamin A in the same way. Vitamin A is a very, very important nutrient for our immune system and our skin as well, for example. So I think the vitamin D is definitely one that I know can get tested. And there's a company which I have no allegiance with at all called, I think it's Thrive. You can get sort of home finger prick tests done for thyroid hormone and so on, but it depends on your needs. So you've asked me a question of how long is that piece of string? I said, well, it does depend on the individual as to what they most need. Given the access of all those things, that the mineral test is quite specific. There is a lab. I, again, have no affiliation or financial connection with these things I'm talking about. BioLab is a fantastic lab. You need a practitioner to go through that. Maybe other labs that can access them. But certainly that's a mineral test. But there was vitamin D via doctor, the hematology test and biochemistry. But I will also say this, yes, a useful test, but to sort of couch it, and it is a very complex thing you've asked ultimately, is that I have met so many clients who have completely normal hematology and biochemistry, but have quite distinct imbalances in their health.
Oh, interesting. What are some of the conditions that you've actually helped people with?
Yes, it's good. This is quite long, and I feel blessed for that too. And I still have the same sense of gratitude and appreciation, and I'm not sure the word thrill is there, but genuine inner pleasure at an individual improving their health. In my client base, so my clients have followed the recommendations, and they have done this for themselves. I've been the director of the program, so I don't cure anyone. Never use the word cure. I'm looking to support the individual and allow the body to do what it will to heal itself. I've had individuals resolve rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis completely, and with a brain scan showing the brain lesions are gone. So RA, MS, sarcoidosis, Hashimoto's, greatly improved lupus, which is a really challenging autoimmune condition, psoriasis completely resolved, eczema, migraines, headaches, IBS, IBD, inflammatory colitis, infertility has been resolved by them, ladies and gents being fertile again. So there's actually, I'm trying to think, there's skin conditions, gut conditions, autoimmune conditions. Again, never making any claims. I'm not looking to have any guarantee, but I've had clients completely resolve or greatly diminish imbalances. I saw one child, just as a slight tangent, who had a genetically a very odd situation that they estimated was only affecting 1 in 30 million people. So it's extraordinary. The father was fortunate to be blessed with being very well off, and he took his son to see various geneticists around the world in Boston, Paris, London, and he spent a fortune on airplane flights, let alone consultancy fees, and had basically a description of his son's state on a genetic level, but nothing changed his health. So we did amino acid testing with the urine of this 2-year-old kid, and we did again a mineral test through the urine. We just collected the urine. We didn't want more blood tests, and I simply looked to change his nutritional status and had the best improvement in the health ever witnessed, that not achieved by the brilliant professors of genetics, but they weren't there to help correct it. They said, this is where it's going to be, this is the trajectory, this is what's going to happen to your son. But we changed the nutrition, and things changed immediately. He was 2 weeks a month hospitalized. So it's just really a story. Every month, 2 weeks in. And the father actually contributed to the hospital and actually basically bought a bedroom for himself. Was very generous. But they didn't make us. But after nutrition, he was there 2 days a month after he engaged in the nutrition.
Oh, wow.
So just to give you a story, it's a story about, and I'll never meet that again. And of course, very fond connection with the father and the mother. and so on. Again, it's serious genetic conditions. So even with the most extreme sort of rare conditions, there's still things you could do by optimizing nourishment, allowing the body to do what it can do. But I mean, some of the most satisfying ones has been the MS and the crushing migraines for one girl. All I'm saying is they don't have any signs of it, and they have no blood tests, or again, when the brain scan showed 8 lesions, and then the lesions were gone. Now, again, that individual followed the program, and we're still in contact with that person. She's a practitioner now. So it's been best, and other clients improve but don't get all that way. So there's this, and some clients, if depending on when I see them, don't make much improvement at all, depending on where they're at. But the possibility for change, because what we did was we looked at the underlying causes, Anshu, and we corrected them. So we identified the underlying causes within that individual with MS, and we looked to correct them. So it's completely complementary. It's not contravening or contradicting any medical treatment they're receiving when they're told you can't do anything. This is the trajectory of your condition. And this is the same with almost all autoimmune conditions. So I've had other clients with MS who have not done so well at all. So you know, it's been emotionally quite tough, and it is tough when individuals don't improve so much. So there's something else to look for. We've got to turn over every stone and have a look underneath and see what's what. And I would recommend testing for those people. So that individual, they had a bacterial infection that was inside their cells. Right. And we identified it with a German test, because the test didn't exist in London, in England. So they had a positive test for this bacteria, which has been long associated with MS in the literature, and we basically killed it with natural remedies, so natural antibacterials, and we reduced inflammation, and we supported the growth of the myelin sheath, and we helped to improve the gut microbiome, and we took away gluten and dairy because they were aggravating things. So just to give you a quick synopsis, there's a lot going on, but we got rid of the bug, and it took 9 months to get rid of the bug. And the first book that I wrote in 2004 was The Insulin Factor, so obviously insulin, diabetes, but you can have pre-diabetes and diabetes. And I would say, I used to think it was more simple than it probably is, but I haven't met a case of someone with a diabetic state where we have not improved their blood glucose levels. And then that's easily measurable, because you can do finger prick testing, or you've got monitoring processes where you can actually see the feedback of what you're doing. So in that sense, it's a very lovely condition to actually monitor, because it's so easy to monitor. You get the feedback of what you're implementing. Is it helping me? And then that gives more confidence to the person to continue to engage in something, or they can say, look, Antony, this isn't working. My blood sugar's gone up, and then we can change the program accordingly. But the underlying causes of diabetes may not always be straightforward. And I will take the liberty, if I may, just to bend your ear on one thing with diabetes. What's fascinating is to see the influence of certain toxins in the environment promoting diabetes, particularly. I know, very interesting. So toxicity of a certain kind, particularly arsenic. So it's in the literature. Any one of you can then do a PubMed search or go onto the search engine, look at arsenic and diabetes, and the studies will come up. And arsenic is basically in the air from some factory or other. It then comes down in the rainfall, and it gets absorbed by rice in particular, especially when the country doesn't have the Environmental Protection Agency, with teeth, as it were, to actually do a good job. And so you eat rice on a regular basis, and you increase your ingestion. Of course, rice is a carbohydrate, but you're ingesting arsenic. And in one period of time, all the rice products were assessed for arsenic, and there wasn't one that didn't have it. So it's a question, and actually white basmati rice may actually be more useful and have less arsenic than the brown rice, which we're taught to eat, because it's in the husk. The arsenic's more in the outer husk. So it's just a story that toxicity sort of like I was eating, and rice, of course, is not particularly nutritious, as is no grain is nutritious particularly. But a lot of people eat rice, especially obviously the Chinese and the Asian. And if you avoid gluten, you'll be having rice instead. So just to share with you that on that subject, is there are hidden things in the environment that can play a significant role in health. And then you might need more. As I was saying, you've got the current account, the savings account, pension account. You might actually need this level just to attain better health, to help the detoxification processes, let alone focusing on just blood sugar management with a glycemic index controlled diet.
How do you know what factors are affecting a particular person?
Yes, and I do practice of muscle testing. I'm not a fully qualified kinesiologist, to make that clear, but I'm a big fan of it, and I learned it specifically from one-to-one teaching in order that I can ascertain whether that was good or bad for somebody, like a supplement or a food, for example. So I study and I teach, and without the teaching I wouldn't learn so much. So I was aware that I need to improve my technical knowledge. And of course, if I see a client, I've got 500 pieces of information about their health. I read all the questionnaires in advance, so it's clinical case history. with my experience of some of those clients of 18,500 have been diabetics, in fact, quite a number. I've got technical knowledge, and then I would certainly use a sort of intuitive kinesiology to help to pinpoint more specifically what might be a priority for that person, as opposed to just a glycemic load. And in this instance, toxicity came up. So then we did a urine challenge test, and arsenic was off the end of the scale in that individual. So in fact, I used testing to confirm a theory, and if you like, a strong hunch. I think most practitioners use an intuitive sense, whether they know it or not, but I'm using mine deliberately as a tool to help me find things out. And I've been training that particular muscle for 21 years.
What are some of the tips that you can give people in the current climate to help them with immunity?
Yeah, very good question. Of course, vitamin D, we come to that. So vitamin D status is very, very important. And it's remarkable how many people have a low level. Some people might need to take quite a high level of vitamin D just to get a normal range in their blood test. So and then people need different amounts. And so dark-skinned folk won't convert the sunlight to vitamin D so much as pale skin like myself. And so those with whether Indian or African, because the darker the skin you've got, the more vitamin D you'll need. Some individuals don't have a gallbladder. It's the 50,000 cholecystectomy operations a year. So having a difficulty with digesting fat-soluble vitamins and minerals, so it's vitamins A, D, E, and K, that might pose an issue as well. So it's really digestion and absorption type issue with fat-soluble nutrients. That could be a factor. So vitamin D, hugely important, I would say. Vitamin C, and Vitamin C for COVID is a website I'd recommend if people are interested, go and have a look at. There's basically prospective and studies and reviews of vitamin C, particularly with regard to the COVID-19, which is very interesting indeed. So vitamin C is hugely important to support the immune system against all bugs, viruses, and bacteria. And then there's zinc. So zinc plays a very important role for immunity. In fact, it's those three nutrients are probably the most important. And whilst every nutrient works in synergy, and whilst it's very important as a tenet of modern nutrition to appreciate the 50 essential nutrients, those three nutrients alone, as takeaway messages for our audience today, it's certainly going to support your immune system. And just to give you one stat, and I appreciate we're not talking specifically about COVID-19, but it's been documented in the studies, and you may have read this too, that if you have an optimal level of vitamin D, you minimize the chance of hospitalization by 80%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's quite profound, and this is from peer-reviewed PhD scientists. And so there are issues as to why that wasn't that known. And David Davis MP did stand up in the House of Parliament and did ask the question about vitamin D. Wasn't really given a satisfactory answer, I note. It was virtually empty House of Commons, but he was well briefed. And so no matter what we might think about David Davis, hats off to him for standing up in the House of Parliament and asking the question about vitamin D and looking at this research. Equally, vitamin C. So if you combine vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc, the synergy between them and the power of prevention for any condition, for any cold, flu, etc., hugely relevant. So quite apart from COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, those three nutrients have a very, very profound benefit on immunity.
Intermittent fasting.
Yes.
What is your view on that?
Yeah. IF, intermittent fasting, basically reflects that you're leaving a chunk of time in the day, a number of hours where you're not eating, and you've got a time-restricted window, so you're eating in a certain number of hours. And so I would say that most people have an intermittent fasting overnight, and they might have 12-hour gap anyway between dinner and breakfast. But typically, intermittent fasting typically starts about 16-hour gap, so it's 16:8. So it's 8 hours in which you eat and 16 hours in which you don't. And it's sort of like it's good for everyone, especially if you're overweight, and it'll help you lose weight and so on. And we know that animal studies do show that certainly in rat studies, we found intermittent fasting was shown to be a significant factor because all the rats ate the same food. They even eat the same amount of food, even if it was junk food, and they were still better off because of when they ate it rather than what they ate. So very interesting. It's not for everyone. Imagine if you could find something that's good for every human being. Well, water, oxygen, I'm with you. Adequate protein, these are essential nutrients, no doubt about it. But intermittent fasting is not appropriate for a number of people. If you have subclinical or primary hypothyroidism, you don't make enough energy in your body, and effectively you'd end up being a cruel torture because you'd be so tired you wouldn't be able to nourish your system. And if you eat less calories and your metabolism is slow, then you have a set of uncertainty. What's going on? Uncertainty. Right. I tell you what, I'm going to slow my metabolism down because I have an uncertain future. I'm not sure when I'm going to slow down metabolism because I haven't got enough energy. So it actually there's this adaptive response. So hypothyroidism, hypoadrenalism, we have insufficiency of producing cortisol, so long-term stress on the adrenals and thyroid. And then there are other instances for blood sugar fragility that would mean that it's not appropriate for everyone. So I would say, for whatever you do, I would start gently. So if it's 12 hours currently, well, go to 13 hours. Okay. Go to 14 hours. So do experiment, sure. Then maybe go to 14 and just see how you feel. But if the headaches don't resolve, if your fatigue doesn't resolve, and your productivity and mental performance goes down, then I have to question whether it would be a very good thing. I think seeking the help of somebody. But I would say, in my humble opinion, because it is just my opinion, based on my experience, I would say that intermittent fasting across the board is probably very appropriate for about 35% of the population.
Oh, wow.
It's probably okay for 30%, and probably not okay at all for the rest.
Okay. Can thyroid be treated without medication?
Yes, and now, yes, it can. And in fact, during the first lockdown, I dedicated myself to creating some videos on that, and they're for free. So it's HaynesHealthManuals.com. Now, the website does need some attention, and the Latin in there is meant to be filled with English, but so apologies for that. But you can access the free videos I presented on the thyroid, and you can indeed. In fact, I've had many clients. In fact, I take it on as an absolute challenge, except for someone who's got a gross primary hypothyroid set. And of course, you need to see your doctor. Of course, you need to have those tests. But there's a lot going on subclinically, which is in the realm of functional medicine, where you can improve your thyroid hormone function. And I have to say that I literally cannot remember a single case where that hasn't improved to some degree. And mostly, it puts the person back in charge of their health. And yes, levothyroxine can be very, very, very good as a drug. It's a hormone replacement. It can be very, very good, but it so often doesn't work because the T4, which is levothyroxine, is the inactive thyroid hormone. And you need it to be converted to the T3, which is the active thyroid hormone, and that can be achieved with nutritional means: reduce inflammation, balance blood sugar, and provide the thyroid hormone and the enzymes to convert the T4 to T3 appropriately. So an awful lot can be done with nutrition. Absolutely.
How much protein for people with cholesterol?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one of my favorite subjects, protein, and cholesterol, of course, is overblown as a risk issue. Of course, total cholesterol doesn't really mean much. And the reason why cholesterol is actually a bad thing for us to have too high a level of is because it's the oxidation of the LDL cholesterol, which is often a derived calculated figure rather than actually assessed in a fat test. They say, well, we've got that much and that much, therefore you must have this much LDL. The low-density lipoproteins is the, inverted commas, bad cholesterol. But it's only really bad if it's been oxidized. So it's like they have free radicals, and it's oxidized LDL that is pro-atherogenic. And so inflammation is the bane of all things. And if you've got too much inflammation, too much stress, you can have raised cholesterol. If you have low thyroid, you can have raised cholesterol. In fact, the first thing I think about with someone with high cholesterol is, do you have a subclinically low or more profoundly low level of thyroid hormones? So protein and cholesterol, there's not a huge connection, but if you have protein and you balance your blood sugar, it can often stabilize your blood sugar, stabilize insulin, the most profoundly inflammatory hormone in the body, in excess, but we need it. It's essential. Without it, we die. And so diabetics type 1, they need insulin. So protein stabilizes blood sugar and can help to lower cholesterol. And how much protein? Well, to be honest, most people who are not eating enough protein might need 20 to 25 grams of high biological value protein, which is equivalent to basically 2 scoops of protein powder, 3 eggs at one time.
3 eggs? Wow.
Yeah, 3 eggs gives you, well, 1 egg contains about 6 or 7 grams of protein. It also contains useful fat. So I'm not saying everyone should eat eggs all the time. I'm giving an example. So it would be a fillet of salmon, it would be breasts of chicken to get the 20 grams of protein. Most people don't need enough protein unless it's rather obvious that they are. I mean, what I'm saying is we need protein. It comes from the Greek word protos, meaning first. It's the first most important nutrient. And I meet a lot of clients who aren't eating enough protein, particularly if they're not having protein for breakfast. It is quite difficult to get too much protein. By definition, it's very difficult to get too much protein, and most people are having too little. Protein is really important. It tends to be the most expensive of the macronutrients compared to carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Protein is the most expensive.
Right.
Yes. So you buy fish, chicken, especially if you're buying organic, it's going to cost more than it would be if you bought beans and vegetables, etc. It wouldn't be quite so costly. But we need adequate protein, and the more stress and duress your life is in, then the more protein you'll need typically. And an excess protein has not been shown to hurt the kidneys, even though there are some rumors that it did. But there's some studies have been carried out with very high protein intake for a year, and they did blood tests and urine tests on a relatively young cohort of individuals, and there were no imbalances whatsoever after 1 year of what we might consider very high protein intake.
Thank you, Antony. Thank you. That was such an enlightening talk.
Well, thank you for having me, Anshi.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you for listening to this chat. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to this page. Please subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify, Wellness Curated, and follow us on Instagram, Wellness Curated, the number 1. Thank you.